each other, our work. And I have read both of your academic biographies. They are very impressive. And thank you, Chorshanbe, for introducing to us these wonderful scholars, people who have done so much interesting and important work. I think our research interests and topics, they kind of connect cultural heritage, cultural studies, music, ethnomusicology, women, so all of these things I think are quite important, and I very much hope that in the future we will, after we learn, about each other's work and future plans, we can find some maybe interesting projects for collaboration. And you raised very, very important questions in the abstract that you sent to us for today's talk. So we really need to, strengthen this inter-Asian collaborations and network expanded. And it is true that at UCA we are really limited with our own national boundaries, but still we are trying to go to work as a regional scholars to approach the issues from a regional perspective, not so much from national perspective, which is also very important. The Central Asian countries, we are quite new nation states, which were established right after the Soviet collapse. We are only 30 years old, country. So we are still learning, our ways to deal with our national cultures, national issues of development. And at the same time, we are really, influenced by outside cultures, Western developed countries. All kinds of opportunities are there. So we need to, I think, find our own way of really finding the common interest that would be mutually beneficial to us. And we really need to have good relationship and learn more about our regional neighbors. So I am really looking forward to your talk today. And Dr. Han, thank you very much for also joining us as a discussant. So I'm excited. So I'm here just to learn about what you have to say.
So how should we do this? We just begin?
I think we could just begin. People can join us. They can join while we are already here. So let's start. Yeah.
Okay, so I've actually written down my comments because I feel otherwise I will take too much time. I'm trying to speak for about, say, 20 minutes or a little longer. And then I have a video and a music track that I will be playing.
Excellent.
Yoshandra, someone from your IT department will help me with that, right?
Yes, I will play them.
All right, so I'll just begin then. So in this talk, I'm going to focus on some of the institutional and epistemological challenges faced by any critical inquiry that we undertake in Asia in particular, that tries to overcome different kinds of methodological nationalism. I'll speak more about this in a while. But what I'm foregrounding here is the Inter-Asia Cultural Studies Network that I belong to, that's over 2 decades old. And I will take a look at it to see what its ambitions have been, what its achievements have been, and what are the things that we have not been able to do so far. So it's called Cultural Studies, Inter-Asia Cultural Studies, but that term is only a placeholder for interdisciplinary engagements that are not confined to the academy. My new center at Ahmedabad University, which is in Western India, is inspired by the IACS network, which has prompted me to take the idea of comparative research into domains of inquiry beyond the humanities and social sciences. I want to suggest that comparative research could well become the cornerstone of the challenge to methodological nationalism. So this methodological nationalism, as many scholars have called it, is particularly evident in the formulation of questions about polity, economy, society or culture in Asia. The big political project of the 20th century At least in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and some parts of Africa, this big political project was decolonization. And that was premised on the idea of the nation and of the nation state as being the vehicle for the realization of social political aspirations of the newly emerging public. But very often, this nation state idea overdetermines both our institutional and epistemological endeavors. Research problems are formulated along national lines, and so both the analyses and the solutions restrict themselves to national boundaries. I'm sure that you are very familiar with this in your own region, maybe from a different point of view, but this is clearly a problem, especially with many new nation states. The desire to have a unique identity that does not overlap with any of the neighbors. So as a consequence of this restriction of formulating the national boundaries, formulating the problems along national lines, as a consequence of this restriction, when we trace the histories of the present, we fail to grasp the interconnections between peoples, communities, and geographies that precede and continue to impact the contemporary world. Even while attempting to think regionally, conventional combinations drawn from old colonial forms of governance, South Asia, East Asia, West Asia, Central or Southeast Asia, these terms come into play, resulting in the continued use of 20th century Cold War perspectives, which themselves build on those colonial forms. The IACS network has tried not to promote any kind of indigenism or regionalism or nationalism. Instead, we've tried to pose the question anew of what kind of critical discourse we should develop in Inter-Asia. So in the IACS network, we've tried our best to distinguish our approach from those who pin the responsibility of knowledge production on specific identities. We suggest that it's not a question of identity, but a question of perspective, and suggest further that the question should be, what does it mean to speak from Asia? To speak from Asia is to develop alternative frames of reference that do not make the West the default pole of comparison. While we emphasize the importance of comparative work, we also discuss how to make visible the grounds of comparison. We want to draw attention to the normative frame that has the West in quotation marks as its main reference point. So the West is sometimes not even a geography, it's a particular imaginary, if you like. So we want to draw attention to this normative frame that has the West as its main reference point. And in making this normative frame visible, we try to create what I have called alternative frameworks, or Chua Beng Huat from Singapore calls inter-Asia referencing, or Quan-Ching Chen of Taiwan calls the multiplication of frames of reference. Our objective has been to dismantle area studies and Orientalist perspectives by emphasizing the space from which one is studying, by marking our own location, by articulating the questions arising from that space which may propel us into another location, and by finding a path by which the new questions can leak back into the home location. The phrase I've always found the most illuminating and which captures sharply what I have been trying to say in a roundabout way is from the founding figure of IACS, Quan-Ching Chen. He talks of how he began to visit Seoul in South Korea when the IACS network was set up. The more I go to Seoul, he said, the better I understand Taipei, where he's from. So we'll talk about this more as I go forward. I'd like now to speak a little bit about the conditions of inter-Asian knowledge production, which I've signaled in my abstract. If earlier scholarship coming from the global south or from Asia was produced within the nation state and was also about the nation state, is globalization then the lived experience within which the new inter-Asian knowledge must be produced? Or is that not the right way of thinking about it? Can we provide a counter-narrative that is not dependent on neoliberal globalization? I think the counter-narrative has to emphasize the fact that we are connected, but we are not the same. So the world is not flat, it's probably bumpy. So surfacing the histories of interconnection is one of the forms of intellectual and creative labor that we in Inter-Asia should undertake. The IACS network was indeed energized by alternative forms of globalization, by what I've called the drive to find and multiply our reference points in developing new conceptual frameworks for thinking about our presence. Key early architects of the network, as I've mentioned, were Quan-Ching Chen of Taiwan and Chua Beng Huat of Singapore, who became the executive editors of the ISES journal, which is being published from 2000 onwards and was in preparation for at least 3 years prior to publication. So it's well over 20 years old. The original ISES collective, of which I am also a member, consisted of scholars whose intellectual trajectories were formed in the post-Bandung Third Worldist movements and the post-Cold War era, who were trying to figure out the relationship to the non-Western critical movements. So the idea of movements has been central to ISES, which was envisaged as an intellectual movement connected to a range of social cultural movements in diverse ways in each location. Activist scholars were among the initial members of the network. They were feminists, they were LGBTQ activists, trade union members, people from civil society groups, people from peace and livelihood initiatives, and a range of NGOs. The ISES scholars were connected to social movements in different ways. They spoke and wrote about them to diversify our sense of resources for knowledge production in Asia and to connect knowledge production to transformatory politics. This complex relationship shows up in the form and content of the ISES journal. I want to mention here that also at the heart of the ISES project was the idea of the journal, journals in different Asian locations, as well as publishers and publications, since the focus was so clearly on knowledge production. An exploratory and tentative set of formulations about how to think through this complex relationship is found in Quan-Ching Chen's book, Asia as Method. Asia as Method gestured towards a collective paradigm shift rather than a systematic method. Chen even calls it an emotional signifier, the turn towards Asia, if you like. Perhaps it's more of a methodology than a method. As I've argued elsewhere, it's a set of broad principles of doing research from which we can then derive particular methods. When the network came into existence in the late 1990s, inexpensive international travel was just opening up. The success of ISES is partly due to the possibility of physical travel as we moved around Asia, getting to know each other's places and speaking to each other directly in those locations. As we all know, that form of travel pretty much disappeared during the pandemic, and travel inside Asia is only just beginning again. We can address maybe during the discussion how we can reimagine inter-Asia work without the kind of traveling we have done in the last 2 decades. I'll speak now about how we articulate new axes of connection in the larger Asian region. The vast bulk of the contemporary discussions about Asian societies is addressed conventionally only through the lens of international relations, resulting in a narrow set of concerns about how governments deal with one another. This again is the problem of assuming that the nation state is a definitive unit of analysis and understanding. Let me now present, towards the end of my presentation, an example of inter-Asia creative work that tries to go beyond methodological nationalism. I refer here to my India-China musical collaboration project, which is called Saath Saath, Music Across the Waters. Saath Saath is a Hindi phrase which means together, together. And it also mimics the way in which in different forms of Chinese, people repeat a word in order to emphasize the importance of it. To give you the background, since 2016, I have been curating collaborations between Indian musicians and their counterparts in Hong Kong and China. I was living in China and in Hong Kong until last year, and this gave me the opportunity to move around in the region. And what has happened is that 2 albums and a documentary film based on the collaborations were released in 2021. In 2016, I had moved to Hong Kong, and in that year, film director Surabhi Sharma and I repurposed the videos from the footage of our earlier film, which was eventually released as Returning to the First Beat. This is about Hindustani music in Bombay, that is North Indian classical music. So footage from that film was shown at the Shanghai Art Biennale in 2016. And to coincide with the Biennale opening, I took 3 Hindustani vocalists to Shanghai to present concerts and workshops. During the time, we were introduced to a troupe of Kunchu opera performers, and to a pipa player, and we talked to them about working together. At that point, I had not figured out as an academic what the research objectives of this project could be. My earlier work on Hindustani music in Mumbai had thrown up a number of questions about musical subjects, about the performance of modernity, about colonialism and cultural practice. These were, I admit, questions asked within a nation frame and needed to be asked now from a more comparative perspective. So I brought these questions to China via Hong Kong. This time, however, the research has been via music making. And music making is an act that addresses the research questions only obliquely. I'm still working on answering the questions that started me off on this journey. I'll mention some of the questions here. As modern people, what is our relationship to the past as we envisage it in Asia? What does it mean to acquire the skills to perform Indian classical music, or play the pipa, or act in Kunchi opera today in the contemporary world? What do modes of performance and musical teaching styles in India and China tell us about our relationship to our everyday worlds? And now coming to the realm of creative practice, what happens when Indian and Chinese musicians meet? Are they able to overcome the lack of shared languages? Can they communicate through voice and melody? And if so, what are they communicating? To take a concept from my previous book, Musicophilia in Mumbai, can they develop a lingua musica that overcomes linguistic differences? Do they simply perform their own music side by side with each other, or can they actually create new music together? There are musical crossings between India and China, and they date back to the 6th century, a good 1,400 years ago, during the Tang dynasty, when songs, instruments, and musicians from West Asia and South Asia thronged the port cities of China. Thus, when the prevailing musical scale in China, it is believed, was transformed into the heptatonic scale under the influence of Indian or South Asian music. Although today, after China has turned to the west, beyond its own immediate west, there may be no traces left of that 7-note scale. The musical challenge then was to figure out how to connect under such circumstances. I'm winding up soon now. I'm aware of the time constraint. One of the major challenges any scholar working to compare India and China might face is the existence of multiple forms of Orientalist knowledge, rendering the Asian neighbors opaque to one another in the present. To cut through this opacity, I began to work with a mode of musical conversation as a cultural political intervention. The music we produced is intended to inspire in future the production of new forms of knowledge. Although the musical conversation may not be able to directly counter the prevailing Orientalist knowledge forms, it can still build arcs of connection through melody and gesture, through eating and drinking together, through being on the road together. These simple gestures, everyday gestures of eating and traveling, and of making music together, constitute the intervention that aims to create subtle cultural shifts, which are not state-centered, and that prepare the conditions for other kinds of change. These changes can't be measured or assessed in quantitative terms, but can still be perceived, as we see in the audience response to our music tracks. Let me now give you a sample of both the struggle and the achievement in the India-China musical conversation. I will request Joshanbe to play a part of the footage from the film Movement Traces, directed by Surabhi Sharma, and then play a track from our new album. Please go ahead, Joshanbe.
Okay, let me share the screen. Okay. Can you see my screen? Yeah?
Go ahead.
Is it coming?
This is not the pitch I usually sing in, but let's see.
Do you have the sound and the video?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear it.
Okay,
Go ahead.
great.
अखियाँ प्रेम बरसाइया अखियाँ प्रेम बरसाइया जन जाने दुख दाय नाम स्नेहि कारणे नाम स्नेहि कारणे रो रो रात बिता. This tune, if it's okay, we can learn it together. Rest of it is all we can play around a lot.
Yeah. Maybe
And
we don't need to. I don't think I need to play this tune. I can
Just this tune,
Yeah, just a little bit.
only these two lines, if you can bring in,
Mhm.
because it's like a chorus.
Ah, okay.
So it will be a place where we can bring in together. Rest of the composition is left for it to shape however. It's not bound by anything. So we can rhythmically take it or non-rhythmically, it's fine.
Can you sing the chorus again?
नैनो अंतर अंतर टा टरररा टा टरररा टा टरररा टा टरररा. Yeah. नैनो अंतर आव तू नैनो अंतर आव तू नैनो अंतर आव तू नैनो अंतर आव नैन झांपे तो हिले नैन झांपे तो हिले नैन झांपे तो हिले नैन झांपे तो हिले ना मैं देखूं और को ना मैं देखूं और को देखूं देखूं और को
Just the scale itself, it's not in Chinese music at all. So even we do something, it will sound very not Chinese.
Okay,
Yeah, because the scale does not exist in Chinese music.
so it's absolutely new into your
The scale, yes. Yeah.
So what she is asking you is, keeping the Indian scale, can you do something Chinese in this?
or
In
if you
fact-
just improvise as Kimbo, leave Chinese as
In
Kimbo.
fact, we are already doing this. I think. In fact, even when we do the composition, I think we are already doing this.
Okay,
So,
We are already
yeah, if
sort
they
of-
play independently, then you'll know what they're improvising.
that's what.
So one suggestion is then, because it shouldn't sound too perfect.
Yeah.
And we also need to know the journey from where they have traveled, like what's the journey they have taken to come here. So it would be nice if they actually did, like we are doing with everyone else, if each one of them could play something on their own. It doesn't have to be tinged with Bhairav necessarily. And then they play this with you, we can see the movement.
Okay, now let me share the audio, right? Okay, just a second. Okay. Please let me know if you have the sound.
Yes.
Okay, great.
为什么你的心如此游荡？告诉我你在追寻什么？这是什么愿望？回到内心宁静。为什么你的心如此游荡？告诉我你在追寻什么？这是什么愿望？回到内心宁静。मनवा तोरा भटकत काहे? अब बताओ का तो ढूंढे? आस ये लागत तरपत काहे? राखो रे सबर मनवा प्यारे। मनवा तोरा भटकत काहे? अब बताओ का तो ढूंढे? आस ये लागत तरपत काहे? राखो रे सबर मनवा प्यारे। मनवा तोरा भटकत काहे? भटकत काहे? भटकत काहे? उत बन बन निस दिन राह तकत हो। इत उत बन बन निस दिन राह तकत हो। मन ही मन उलझ सुलझ भीतर सब मिल जावे। मन ही मन उलझ सुलझ भीतर सब मिल जावे। विषम नीर सिंह रूस योदा 告诉我你在追寻什么？这是什么愿望？回到内心宁静。为什么你的心如此游荡？ भटकत काहे? अब बताओ का तो ढूंढे? आस लागत तरपत काहे? राखो रे सबर मनवा प्यारे। 心如此游荡，告诉我你在追寻什么？这是什么愿望？回到内心宁静。为什么你的心？
Great. Well, thank you very much for sharing this beautiful music with us. It's really was a food for soul, and I think this is a very important. I think interesting platform. I think, as you mentioned in the beginning, for knowledge production, for creating this network, inter-Asian cultural network, and that's a great way of initiating collaboration between Asian countries and cultures. And music, I think, is a great example. I think that we can connect and learn from each other. In Central Asia, as you know, our musical traditions, musical instruments are also very much influenced by our neighboring countries' culture and musical traditions, especially from India, Persian culture, musical instruments. But unfortunately, there is not much, in-depth research done in examining that historical connection, cultural connection between these neighboring Asian countries. And this is a great example that now for the 21st century, I think we need more creative and innovative ways of engaging with our shared cultural traditions, musical traditions. And so this is very important. I just wanted to let you know that at UCA, our unit, Cultural Heritage and Humanities Unit, we also began exploring these creative ways of engaging with our cultural heritage, and not of Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan only. We have a research fellow, I hope he's with us, but he had another meeting during this time, Aybek Baymbetov, who's a very multi-talented young man who's a filmmaker, but he has a very nice creative and a network of young people in Kyrgyzstan, which work, which bring together different forms of art like film, theater, and music, animation. They try, to create this cultural products by trying to adapt old meanings to new audiences, and to revitalize our rich cultural heritage through innovative forms of visual and performing arts. So this is already starting here, and this summer we are planning to organize a musical summer camp on the shores of our Lake Issyk-Kul. And in the past, Aybek has organized 3 times this kind of a summer camp, musical summer camp for composers, young composers and musicians, instrumentalists for Kyrgyzstan. And the outcome of these summer camps were very, very productive, and they have produced over 25 new compositions where young musicians came together with different musical instruments and composed very, very nice musical compositions, and they're going to record them and publish this album soon. But this year they expanded their coverage of the region by inviting musicians from Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, from Mongolia and Khakassia and Altai region also. And but in the future, after this year's summer camp, we would like to also expand to more other regions. This time we will also try to invite musicians from Pakistan also. But now we have connections. We have know our scholars from India and Polish like yourself. I think this will be a very good opportunity for us to learn and to bring musicians from India also. And I'm really excited about this kind of innovative, collaborative ideas and projects. So I don't want to talk too much, and I think we give the floor now to our discussant, Dr. Han. Please.
Yeah, I think the presentation and the outcome itself, the cultural practice is so rich. And so maybe I'll begin with the word that I've noticed in chat. two of the responses, Professor Niranjana, to your presentation has been soul uplifting, spirit connecting. This I think is important, not just as an emotional gesture, but also an intellectual response to knowledge production. So what may be not resembling maybe the textual, in this case, the script or the text of the music, but what I think I really like the way you translated resemblances rather than similarity. And I think it's in that sense, music as a language, the sound. So here I'm making a distinction between, let's say, the text of the music versus the sound, and sound as language, sound as method. And I think the way you've used some of the word and for the production, crossing rather than complete separation. So there is a sense of movement, and the way you were responding was an idea of gestures to come from where you are and to meet somewhere in between. This, I think, is because I know you have been so influential in terms of method. So this, I think, is important because it helps us move beyond the idea of national languages to the idea of, let's say, soundscape. And I use that word particularly because in some of my discussion with Joshambe, whom I'd worked with at the graduate school, I, for example, did not at that stage understood much of the content of Qasa'id Khani, but I did understand the soundscape in terms of what its function was as a social performative event. In some of our discussion where I would say Qasida operates differently in South Asia as a textual narration, but it does have the social meaning that through sound one way. So we had a conversation despite lack of information. And I could see this in the concert, this idea of finding a language. Okay, so I spent some time on that because I think this allows me to come back to the first half of your conversation talk, which is more, I think, the larger question of there are enough archives, there are enough practices that we could come to, and music, I think, is very important. I would bring music alongside food and other thing, and come to a minute why I think that might matter. Because if we are interested in the idea of the everyday cultural practice, then I think we have to also move beyond this realm of the state structures of cultural arenas. Yeah, and at that level, music and food are really not national epistemologies in that sense, or categories, because let's take an example of something like Manti, this gefüllt dumplings as they are called in Germany. I have encountered different version of this food in this Turkish, Chinese, Tajik, Afghan variant. And they all tend to think of this as a national thing. And yet it's profoundly, in terms of taste, something that cannot be nationalized. It's also true even for stuffed bread, which has different variations from paratha in South Asia to bolani in Afghanistan to gozleme in Turkey. So what is important is not to erase the difference, but to think more of taste rather than recipe. And I think that's what you were doing with music. The sound becomes, in a sense, something that is not to be erased from its national location, but it can create a third space, a crossing, as you call it. Okay, now if this is a potentiality of thinking through cultural practice rather than cultural institution, then I think it would still merit some challenges that the field faces. And I'm glad you spoke about the long period of academic efforts that have been done around it. So we can think of journal as a cultural practice, as a place of creating that knowledge. But in this case, I would love to hear your thought on the challenge of publication itself. Do you envisage a new model of publication, a new journal as it were, where publication are not meeting only through academic epistemology of English, but do you think a future of inter-Asian publication, comparative publication, must also think of multilingual publication, but also crossing publication through multilingual words within that? So what would be a mode of dissemination of this knowledge, which is not around national or Western language epistemology? Because I think that allows for broader conversation in terms of how we envisage not just documenting, but disseminating it. So that would be one of my questions for you as you envisage and work towards this center. How can we bring multilingualism in cultural practice? That's one. And you, as a translator, and you've written on translation, and I wonder how you bring translation into this mode of comparativism. Okay, I like the idea of comparativism also because although we have an interdiscipline of comparative literature, fields like histories have been very resistant to this. So from national history, they want to do global history, but there's a great reluctance on comparative history. And I wonder if that is the method where, if you think the literary, and I'm not saying that's the only model, but I wonder, given your journey between those disciplines and intercultural studies, do you think there's something that comparativist structures allow that global structures of cultural practice don't allow? Okay. I have many thoughts, but I'm also aware that there is a
Sorry,
very
but you really
diverse
must give me
audience.
some time to internalize what you're saying and to respond.
Yeah,
So I would say
yeah,
hold your questions and let me attempt some provisional answers to the first two, which are very complex. Thank you for those.
yeah,
So the first one is about multilingual practices in publication.
yeah.
I think that, obviously we are all here very much for such a mode of engagement with each other. And actually, in fact, there have been early projects in Asia, especially the journal Traces that
Mhm.
Naoki Sakai was part of and so on. They tried to publish in 4 languages, and it very soon met a very serious obstacle. They had to close just after a few issues. So the problem with the print publication in particular is that, and also certain other kinds of publication, if they have to be authorized by a publisher that is a multinational corporation, they are not interested in trying to bring in many voices from other languages. They just try to flatten everything out, because the other intersection of the multinational publisher is the neoliberal university. And I don't see whether you can point to any university today on the planet that is not a neoliberal university. Whether it's a public university or a private university, it is imbued with certain modes of self-organization, governance, knowledge production that are very much part of that. So I think it would be extremely naive on my part, at least, to say that we are going to overcome all of that and just do something that's going to be free and inspiring and uplifting, as you've been saying. At the same time, you can see that there are intersections here, or maybe interstices, if you like, of the gaps through which you work in order to create something different that uses maybe the affordances of the neoliberal university, like the funds I was able to raise while in Hong Kong from neoliberal sources, but to do something else with it. I think that one has to really be agile in terms of how one is thinking ahead, moving ahead, and do these things where one can. I don't think there's any pure or ideal space where you can engage in this kind of activity. And again, I think maybe the space of the digital engagement, Elmira was mentioning this earlier as well in a different context, that space might allow us, as is now allowing us post-pandemic, if you like, to engage in a way that is very low cost, low maintenance, and able to engage with this multiplicity, including simultaneous translation and things like that, which we are far more easily able to do in an online setting than in a physical setting. Because for 20 years, I've been struggling with that question in inter-Asia meetings, where you're trying to hear what is the Japanese person saying, what's the Korean person saying, etc., right? But online it does become, I think, a little easier. And there are many other forms of online translation that have today become really common. So we have become more literate, actually, in Chinese, Japanese, Korean, and whatever, because we are, like there are friends on Facebook or other platforms who post in certain languages, and you just use Google Translate or use some other translator to sort of figure out what they're saying. And I think that this is really a great improvement over the last 5 years or so. I think that we see that quite distinctly. So I think multilingual conversation is actually possible today in a way that it wasn't before. It's not ideal, like we are not going to know the literatures of each other's language. I don't think we are going to be so proficient, but to communicate and to get a sense of where the direction of the conversation is going, I think we managed pretty well. So that's just a brief response to the first question. The second one about translation, I think flows very naturally, even as you spoke it, from the first question itself. So in a way, I mean, translation in all its many forms, if you like, are at the heart of even a project like Saath Saath, the music project. Because we are translating instruments and making them do things that they are not supposed to do, like the pipa, which is originally coming from West Asia via Central Asia to China. Our colleague Zhang Yi tuned it to make it sound like a sitar, so he can do the meend on it, right? The Yangqin is played. So my colleague Kim Ho Yip from Hong Kong, he came to visit us in India. He studied vocal music. He started playing the santur, because the santur is the grandfather of the Yangqin, which is a so-called Chinese instrument. And he used the Yangqin sticks to play the santur. He bought santur sticks in India, went back to Hong Kong and played the Yangqin with santur sticks, right? So these are very interesting forms of translation that you find. And I'm taking it out of the linguistic aspect for now, because as you very correctly said, if you look at sound as language, or if you look at other modes of engagement also from a linguistic point of view, you see that the act of translation also has to transcend language. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think I'll keep it brief because we need to keep time for other interactions.
Yes, yeah. I think the idea of translation as practice works so nicely with cultural practice in that sense, and allows to move beyond the literary. Okay, I have many other points, but I think I would really at this stage give it back to the chair, because I think we have a very diverse set of participants. It would be nice to hear from them.
Yes, thank you. Let's ask our attendees if they have any questions. Please raise your hand or turn on your microphone and ask questions if you have. Okay.
I don't see anyone, so are they allowed to unmute the attendees?
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay. Or they could use the chat box, whichever.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So Shamba, did you raise your hand? Did you want to?
Yes, nobody's, there's no questions in the chat box. Okay, there is one. Let's say Gulnara Junushaliva.
Mm-hmm.
She's writing that, what is the future plan for Central Asia?
Well, I think Elmira and you have to answer that question.
Well, this talk also gave us some new, ideas, opportunities that for collaboration. So there is a lot to learn from our Indian and Chinese scholars, colleagues. So, but as I mentioned earlier, that we have started a similar kind of project by bringing together musicians and composers from the region, and we hope that in the future we can expand our geographical coverage by going, to Pakistan, India, China, and Japan, Korea. I think this would be a very nice, collaborative project for the future. Music, I think, unites everyone. Yeah, music without borders, as they say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No more questions in the chat? Mm-hmm. Okay, if you allow me, I could...
Yes, please.
Say, yeah, thank you very much again for your great talk, to Jaswini and Razak, for this great discussion that you have made. And really, I mean, when Jaswini sent me the music yesterday, actually I was really down, with these situations that are around us right now. I was really, really down. But while listening to this music, it was somehow like, uplifted my spirit. I felt like, something, it took me out of that kind of, atmosphere that I was in. And then I kept listening, and I think Ravi also mentioned that he kept listening to it, but I also kept listening to it. But it's such a mesmerizing. It's such a, it penetrates your soul and just uplifts it. So it's so great, you know, this connectivity. And then I was like thinking about it, how music can transform, even though we don't understand the language, what does it say? But it actually really, you know, affects, as Razak was mentioning about this music doesn't, it's a language that it doesn't have a border. There's no these border or these things, that it speaks to everyone with their own kind of, you know, sense, wherever you want to listen and in which context you want to listen. So this is the kind of things that I see in music every time when I listen to certain music. But my question is regarding these challenges, mostly like, you know, I could see like how would it be difficult to bring these two different languages into the music scale, in terms of like, for example, let's say the text itself might have their own kind of, you know, structure, but the music has its own structure. And then how did that kind of things that you put together that made this such a beautiful music that it speaks so well, you know, like, you know, even you just don't understand the language. Thank you.
That's a very hard question to answer, but the easy answer would be that I just let the musicians do whatever they wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I sort of like, you know, direct the way in which the interaction flows and keep adding, you know, things that are asking questions, maybe nudging them in a particular direction, but finally what they have produced by themselves. So I think that what you find on both sides in our collaboration is a kind of very good listening capability, that they're very attentive.
Yeah.
And because they're, you know, musicians, they're vocal musicians in particular and also instrumental, they're used to listening carefully.
Yeah.
And when they listen carefully, whether or not they know the language, they're able to pick up on what is being emoted, what is, you know, the way it is flowing, and engage with that. I also think, as I'm saying, that in the project, I was trying to surface historical connections. There is a connection between Indian and Chinese music, or South Asian and Chinese music. It's just that we have lost it over a few hundred years. But there is a way in which I think something comes into the present that allows the interaction to, you know, make it smoother, if you like. So I think there are ancestral historical memories of sound, of scale, of intonation that somehow have come into this. And this doesn't happen consciously. It happens because they're playing around with a tune or some melody or something like that. Yeah. In the particular track that you all heard today, I'll just tell you a little bit about that.
Yeah.
It was actually, you hear it as Hindustani music, sort of,
Yeah.
but it's composed by the Chinese pipa player. He has learned a bit of Hindustani music. He is again very good at picking up quickly. He came and spent time in India and he learned from one of the participants, Omkar Havaldar, and he learned a few ragas, the larger scales of music, and then there's a particular raga called Bhairav, which has a certain set of notes in a particular combination. So 2019 was the last time we all actually met each other before the pandemic. We were actually in the town of Wuhan, and Zhang Yi said, you know, I have this tune. I have a tune I want to sing for you. So he just sang it because he also sings a little. And we said, yeah, it sounds like Bhairav. It is sort of inspired by Bhairav, that scale. He said, I have this tune, but I want you all to write words for it. I want Hindi words. Yeah. So, you know, none of us are native speakers of Hindi, but, you know, that's the language of Indian classical music, Hindustani music. So we all sat in the studio in Jinzhe near Shanghai, and we said, okay, play the tune, play the tune, play the tune. And then we just said, okay, how about these words? And we kept on changing the words. 5 or 6 of us, none of whom speaks Hindi as a native language, put this together. And it was sounding good. And we changed a few things, pushed him to change the melody a little bit. Then we said it does not make sense for it to be only sung in Hindi. We need you to sing it in Mandarin as well. So we did a translation into Mandarin of the first 2 lines of the song, which is what you hear. It's almost exactly that, but when you look at the lyrics in the album, if you Google, you'll find the album and the catalog copy of the album. We have given the lyrics in all the languages. This has become, Razak, a multilingual form, really. Because then we have it, so when you look at the Chinese, it sounds slightly different, the meaning. In the Hindi, it is slightly different. But the tune was composed by the pipa player, who's Chinese. And he always says, I don't play Hindustani music. I'm inspired by it, but I play it along with in a Chinese style. Right? So something very interesting is happening in the track, and it happened throughout our collaboration in very different ways. no one was trying to hold on to the purity of Chinese or Indian music. Things were all coming together, but at the same time, they did remain distinctive. You could hear it and say, yeah, this sounds like Hindustani. This is a Chinese instrument, whatever. But the track makes a very different kind of impact than if you were just to put these two musics together. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, nice. I think we have some questions in our chat box. Question from Catherine Fries. Hello, Catherine. Thank you for joining us. Good to see you. I can't see your face, but hello. I have not been in touch for several months now. Catherine is also a musician and has traveled to Tajikistan and learned Pamiri music and musical instruments. So she's asking here, Professor, I think her question is addressed to you, Professor Razak Khan. So she's saying, I was struck by Professor Razak Khan's disambiguation of resemblances versus similarities in relation to transnational cultural connections. Could you further explain how you see these two terms as serving different purposes?
I think there are more questions for the person Niranjana. I'll be brief. I think Person Niranjana just answered that distinction, which is when two cultures need to come together, or if we want them to come together, this idea of the original, the pure, should not be brought to the table. It's precisely in the practice that something happens. They can find resemblances, by which I mean you don't have to have identification. You create your meaning. So he made Hindustani music precisely through his own location, which was an affiliation with Chinese tradition. But it's this idea of not insisting on finding common ground or becoming one. Like Sat does not become oneness. It means togetherness. And I think this is important in cultural practice. There's too much interest in saying they have to somehow become one. No, they don't have to. It's precisely the difference, or I don't even like the word difference. It's precisely the sense of affinity, something that connect, but that is not same, that precisely in that location of resemblances, not similarity, not mimesis, not mimicry, that in fact something interesting comes out. And therefore, the Chinese musician practitioner is completely right in saying, in fact, he has created a music out of that location. So I think Professor Niranjana has proven to us this method. It is really a method. And I think she also answered my question about multilingualism. So Professor Niranjana, this idea of multiple lyric and translating the Hindustani verse in Chinese, that's what I meant, I suppose, because this can create possibilities of not just multiple meaning, but this idea of maintaining the difference and thinking of resemblances. So as a practice of publication, I was thinking more broadly, and I look forward to actually reading the lyrics as an archive of such a possibility. So thank you. I'll be brief with this. I think there are more questions for her.
Yes.
But I quickly want to come back on to that question because it's a fascinating one, and to add that the name of the albums is Re/Semblance. It's not only resemblance.
Resemblance, yes, semblance.
So I'm also trying to play with the idea that you try to make similar, that you return to a sense of the similar. That's also the historical connection I've been talking about. So there are many meanings of that term, which I think that you've expanded very nicely also. Thank you, Razak, for that. Yeah.
Thank you.
We can discuss this forward. I'll just take a couple of questions because I think there's one that asks about visual art. I mean, that's again a brilliant possibility going forward, but so far we haven't done it. However, Altin Kapalova, you might be interested to know that our major patron in Hong Kong is an art curator and someone who's hosted all our concerts in his art gallery. So we have an affinity, shall we say, using Razak's word, but we haven't exactly done anything with visual artists. Maybe there is a project there in the future to take place. There are two questions from colleagues, people I know, and I think it's they both have something in common. I don't know how much time we have, but I'll just try to maybe combine them, and I can always brief them in person when I see them. So Satvik Singh wants to know how scholars engaged in the Inter-Asia project make sense of the term Asia. I would urge you, Satvik, to look at the preface to the journal, which is available from Ahmedabad University online. It's called Inter-Asia Cultural Studies, because the editors and the collective put out the statement 20 years ago. Maybe there will be some change in that, but they call it problematizing Asia. That was how they began. So Asia is not a fixed geography, but it's, I suppose, a set of discrepant historical experiences that, and they do emphasize on a historical materialist understanding of those experiences. How do they come together? How do they, in some complicated ways form, if you like, the ground for the present activities that we are all taking up? I think this is what the term problematizing Asia meant, and that was the title of the first journal issue, in which I also have a piece which is about alternative frameworks. How do you create those alternative frameworks? So in that way, they make it's not, yes, there is a geography. We cannot pretend there is no geography called Asia. At the same time, it's, and also it's people, so it is a demographical, as you to use your term, Satvik, space. However, we are not saying that you need to be identified as an Asian before you can speak for Inter-Asia. We call it speaking from Asia. We're not saying it's about your ethnic affinity or your identity. So the last question is extremely difficult, because that takes us into a whole other turf that I don't feel able to engage with here, because that's very complicated. As you can see, we are all speaking English. Let me stay with the language question. In the Inter-Asia project, it has been difficult not to use English as the common language. I know that University of Central Asia also uses that as a common language. There is, we cannot say that we are going to undo colonialism or undo globalization. We are not going to go back to a past where we can be all speaking our little languages and not be able to connect to one another. So there is no problem with using Western languages, because they have, in many ways, we have internalized them. They have become our own, right? And the language will not then define the epistemology. Yes, we have drawn very freely from many kinds of Western political movements, like say feminism, Marxism, all of these things, and but they are in many ways part of the larger political vocabulary that's available to all of us in Asia. So there is no need to say this is Western, this is not Western. So Inter-Asia project is not an anti-Western project. The Inter-Asia project is to try and re-articulate how we can connect to each other in Asia. I hope that will be sufficient for now. Aditi Dev wants to know what kinds of research questions and vocabularies have been developed through the Inter-Asia lens. Well, there is 20 years of work, Aditi, and most of it embodied in the journal. But I do think that one of the disappointments, which I haven't really spoken about, is that while we've had very, very good conversations across Asian spaces, it's been very difficult to do comparative work. And while from the beginning we pushed for the comparative angle, saying this is what will finally undo methodological nationalism, it has been in practice extremely difficult to follow. I can only come up with one or two examples, some of it from my own works. I don't want to belabor the point, but I think the music project is one example of that. And I think, again, the vocabularies might not be strictly academic. I think we need to also look at forms of practice research as practice, to try and develop or enlarge that vocabulary. So I wouldn't say that there's anything fixed. And it really something you work through a particular project, you may come up with certain ideas or concepts that you could derive from that project, but we could discuss it at another time. Was that the question? Yeah. Razak, I wonder if you want to come back into this conversation and comment on something.
I want to draw on a couple of the points that I think are important as we envisage future cooperation and also method. So I think the visual, bringing the visual into the sonic or the soundscape is another very interesting way to think of Asia as method, Prasanna Rajna. Because again, this idea of music is so sound-centric, partly because of questions of modernity, where the textual has to be annotated. This is the entire journey about Hindustani classical music. The fact was, most of Hindustani music was in fact oral. It was standardized under various demands of modernity and nationalism. So one thing would be insist on the textual, but not work with that as the only available method. So the visual then becomes a language rather than discipline. I think my sometimes hesitation with engaging with visual is because they think of this as discipline, whereas my understanding, which is based on important work on Hindustani music, is that the Hindustani music is an immersive experience, by which it means that this visual, sonic, and even the food mattered because it was a mahfil, as in where, like a performance was an immersive experience. And the visual, I'm insisting partly because is to think of forms of cultural practice, like miniature painting it themselves. It's an important cultural form rather than a discipline. I think this turning of miniature into some kind of visual studies, while important, is also, it has disrupted its connection with the sonic, for example. So that, I think, is important to bring, to think of the idea of the cultural practice itself. I'm thinking here of the Mughal miniature and the similar styles across Central Asia and South Asia. That would be one, but also not discounting Chinese tradition of the visual too. So that would be to thinking of visual not as discipline, but as cultural practice. And I think that's important in ethnomusicology, because again, music has been, in this idea of music and ethnomusicology itself, partly has this trace over where, both the legacies of Orientalism and colonialism sort of makes us think of music as with borders, with people, rather than across. So I also like your idea of the, if I remember correctly, correct me, music across water. I like this because it thinks of water rather than nation. I'll briefly just give one example from Choshambe's work on thinking about mountains and valleys. So one of my discussion with Choshambe has historically been not thinking with, so Badakhshan is important because it's actually part of the geographies also in Afghanistan and Tajikistan. So it disrupts this idea of the nation. We can also think of not just water. I think water has become a method through oceanic studies, but thinking of mountains as not barriers, but through passes and movement of China and Central Asia, or even India, the idea of passes as important for Mughal movement, but also even something like desert. So desert soundscape or areas that are not well connected becomes important. So Ismaili communities, for example, have historically been in areas that were in fact not mainstream, but it's precisely this idea of the dislocated, not central, that I think becomes very important. And that, just to summarize all of this, is to bring the question of geography rather than nation. So thinking with geographical connection, which are not regional. So the mountains are not regional, they are shared, if geographical feature in various parts, becomes important. And I wonder, when we think of Asia, instead of thinking of it as a continent, we can think of geographical condition that creates certain modes of cultural practice. So this would allow connecting Oghur music with Central Asia, or its affinity of thinking about why Sarod and Sitar soundscape developed so centrally in various parts of South Asia. So again, I love the way you said it, Asia as a method rather than as a location, which allows us to think of Asia beyond the continent of Asia. I hope that was my, I suppose I was responding to your thought, but I think this might be a useful way to think of connection between Gujarat and Badakhshan. And this is something I've been suggesting might be a very logical reason to think of Central Asia and Ahmedabad connected through soundscape rather than direct physical connection. Okay, I'll stop at that.
That's very fascinating, Razak. But I do want to say that I didn't put out the phrase Asia as method. It comes actually from, an earlier Japanese thinker and was made famous by Quan-Shing Chen, who
Yes.
wrote a book called Asia as Method.
Yeah.
I was only deploying it to say that it's actually more of an emotional signifier, as Chen himself says. It's not a method. It's more, like I said, I call it a methodology, because it gives you a perspective. That speaking from Asia is a perspective from which you speak, rather than saying it's a method. Yeah.
Speaking
But
from
I
Asia.
did want to, if I may take a couple of minutes, go back to an earlier question that Aditi had asked. And I have another example for a particular form of inter-Asia method that emerged, which is, again, it was Partha Chatterjee, a very famous political thinker from India, who has spent a lot of time in Taiwan, in China, and so on. And there was a particular very long exchange between Quanqing Chen, the author of Asia's Method, and one of the founders of the Inter-Asia Network, and Partho Chatterjee, where they tried to work with the question of what Partho Chatterjee called the political society. Some of you will know that, but if you don't, do look it up. I won't have time to go into it. Partho Chatterjee has a long critique of the Gramscian distinctions and say civil society, political society, and he makes an argument for why the term political society should be used to describe a different set of engagements or groupings. So Quanqing Chen says, but I need to translate this into Chinese. How do I do that? And then he works with a term called Minjian, which means, of the people, by the people, is it the people, whatever. And through a very long exchange, they keep taking these concepts and pressing them against each other. Yeah? So the pressing of concepts, as I've said elsewhere, will not result in the concepts fusing, as you said, Razak. They're not going to become the same concept. They will remain distinctive. But there's a way by which they will speak to one another and open up one another.
Yes.
I think this is another example of Inter-Asia Method.
Yeah. Yeah. If I may, the idea of repetition, Tejaswini, the fact that repetition rather than change, in musical practice, sometimes it's called improvisation or repetition, riyaz. Something comes sometimes precisely not because there's an agenda, there's a movement. So you don't have to change the concept. I think this idea of riyaz or practice itself sometimes creates something entirely new. So I also like this idea of an immersive exchange itself as a practice that will create the concept then. So I think, I hope I do know you've written about the Satsat project, but it became very apparent to me that it is this idea of repetition, an immersive collaboration that can in fact create the concept. You don't have to go with the concept. And so in some way you opened up that idea of the practice and concept not as separate, but can be mutually constitutive. Sorry, it's been very fascinating to see this in your lecture, that how concept creation happens.
Thank you so much. I think you articulated it far better than my lecture did. So, so I'm very glad to hear you say that, and I'm glad it's opening up a different mode of investigation and engagement.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much again for your additional comments and explanations. We have a comment from Altın Kapalo, who is our research fellow at my unit here at UCA. She's also art historian. She's just writing, thank you for sharing your experience and amazing art projects. Love your decolonial approach and using art for social changes. This is what we do at CHHU too. Yes, we are trying to find creative ways of engaging with our cultural heritage, focusing on music and museums, which have rich collections of cultural artifacts and history. Is there any other questions and comments from our attendees? Please raise your hand. We still have a few more minutes. I think Chorshanbe has a question, please.
Well, I don't have any questions, but I just have a comment regarding to this multilingualism into research. And I think we also practice it in CHHU as well. And we have these publication series where we, different scholars, submit let's say their primary research findings, and then, write them as a paper and submit it in various languages. And we publish in Kyrgyz, we publish in Tajik, we publish in Russian, we publish in English. So that is the multilingualism that was raised during the discussions. Actually, we are also doing it in practice at the moment at CHHU. Maybe Elmira can elaborate more on that.
Yeah, in Central Asia, very few scholars use English as a, academic language for their research. So the older scholars, senior scholars, say most of them use their national language and Russian language for their research, for their publications. and we have a younger generation of scholars who had the opportunity to travel abroad and study and receive their higher education from Western universities. Their academic language, of course, is in English. So they usually write in English, and they have, I think, a much better opportunity, I think, to share their research findings with wider audiences. So our unit has two types of publication series. One is a cultural heritage book series, and the other one is research paper series. You can go to our website and learn about the topics for these publications. And our initial focus was on traditional music of Central Asia. So we have supported the research and publication of fundamental works of Tajik and Kyrgyz scholars on traditional music. And so we continue supporting scholars who have very new original works and research, and some of them we translate, if they write in Tajik or in national languages, we translate them into English or into Russian, depending on the audience interest. So we are trying to support research in all languages here from Central Asia. Yeah. And Dr. Niranjana, I am just curious to learn about this album. I will definitely go and check out this link that you shared with us. And did you have kind of a presentation of this album with a wider audience? Maybe how many music compositions did you produce from this research music collaboration, and what was the reaction of your audiences, and was there also like criticism, and how well was it received? I mean, was it all positively received and people enjoyed this kind of new fusion music, whatever you call it, or were there also like criticisms that some people, well, you know, we need to have like authentic Chinese or authentic Indian music, so why do we need to change, or, you know, because we have some discussions here in Central Asia also. Some people are against, you know, changing some tunes and blending different types of, you know, music. Maybe it's usually from the older generation of people who are used to their own national sounds of musical instruments, right? So I'm just curious to learn about the reaction of audiences from India and China to this music outcome.
These are many, many questions rolled into one, so I'll try to answer bits of it. The album has just come out, and it's come out during the pandemic. It came out a few months ago. So we only have 2 reviews from some, one in Spanish and one in English from some different countries, I don't really know. And they have been extremely positive. The Spanish one said it was very lovely music, but the conceptualization was a bit abstract in terms of the research question. But this is the music journal. They're not interested in my research. So I think it's okay. They can like what they like and leave the rest of it. What is nice about making a music album as a collaborative outcome is that all kinds of people who will not read my research will listen to the music. So, you know, I think it's a very positive sign that you do reach out to very different audiences. I don't really know because it's just come out. It's really not had time to sink in. But everyone, I mean, through friends, through the networks, through Parma Recordings, which is the American company that has produced this, they do have very good circulation. Hopefully it'll take some time for it to percolate. It is available on Spotify and YouTube for free. So hopefully people will start listening to it more and more. We have been trying, the musicians have tried through their own networks to popularize the music. But what we found in 4 or 5 years of traveling across China and in some cities in India, and having people in the audience who are purists, who are only about Indian music or only about Chinese music, I was expecting a lot of irritation and criticism. But that was not to be seen. I'm surprised. And I think it could be because these are not people who are non-serious. These are people who are extremely well trained in Indian music and Chinese music. And if they are brave enough to make this engagement happen, then I think people see the value of it. That's the only explanation I have. We've had really absolutely, standing room only audiences, huge audiences, wherever we've gone, everywhere in China, everywhere in India. And whoever could come, so there's been no space to stand so many people. And they always come back for repeat performances. They always say, when are you coming back, etc.
Great.
A lot of questions after the performances in Shanghai in particular, in Hangzhou and other places, but a great lot of interest in what we are trying to do.
Great. I think people really appreciate, new creative works. I think that's what people are looking for now. I think especially Asian, different Asian cultures, coming together, and that's where they can see how much common they have, I think, in their culture and the sound of their music. I mean, we think that we are so different, right? But when you listen to this music, you feel this connection, that you feel that historically these regions, people, they were, much more well connected than nowadays, I think.
If I may briefly join this, because I think it raises the question of future collaboration. The idea of purism is also at the heart of the category of the heritage. And in that sense, while I believe both the university have department, I was looking at yesterday the Museum for Islamic Art in Berlin, and Stefan Weber, who's a very creative curator, has this project of shared past and shared future, which is an idea that while there may be something similar, there will also be something different. And he's doing this partly to think about various migration in Berlin. And there it's very difficult to then be purist about it. So the idea of art and heritage, when we envisage future inter-Asia project, needs to work with it, but also bring attention to this idea, because heritage can very quickly, in idea of management, can very much rely on this idea of preservation rather than also transformation. This has been, for example, a bit of critique of Aga Khan's preservation initiative in India, that, oh, this is not original, it's not similar. But I think when we think of future project, it's important to emphasize idea of heritage, but also in terms of future, as Professor Niranjana's talk is for the 21st century, we need to find also new forms of that. And I wonder if this is something that the two departments in the university can sort of engage with in this idea of heritage management.
Well, I can't speak for my colleagues in heritage management, which is, I don't think shares much in terms of the kind of inspirations we have. But the director of the center is a fellow of my center, and hopefully we can engage in a different kind of conversation there. I doubt if that center will be interested in the music question, but anything is possible. So we'll see as we go forward what we can do.
Well, if there are no other questions, I think we should wrap up our presentation now, our lecture. Well, thank you very much again for sharing your research, collaborative research outcomes. It's really, really amazing work. Thank you very much again we are very happy to get to know you and your work. And I just want to let you know that the University of Central Asia and Cultural Heritage and Humanities Unit, we are very open for new ideas, for new collaborations, opportunities, and let's reconnect in the future and to discuss some future plans, our areas of common interest and research. And I think music is a great way, I think, to start our collaboration and to exchange ideas and to share our findings. Well, thank you very much again. It was a very nice talk, and I personally gained very new and valuable knowledge from today's talk. And there's definitely a need, I think, for us to develop new forms of knowledge that is, as you say, relevant to our, contemporary times.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I must first of all thank Raza Khan, who made the connection possible with your university, and to your very gracious hosting of this event. Thank you so much, and I look forward to meeting you, Elmira and Joshamba.
Okay, great. Thank you very much again. Enjoy the rest of your day. Yeah, we will reconnect. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, our attendees, also for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. This was wonderful. Bye-bye.